Midrash of the Four Children is one of the most well-known texts of the Haggadah, and I wanted to offer you a twist on it this year. Now, before we get to the twist, let's take a moment to just make sure we understand what this Midrash is. This is all based on Exodus 13:8, a verse that comes in the midst of the grand narrative of the story of the first Pesach, the Exodus from Egypt. And it says in that verse, "V'higarat levincha bayom hahu." On that day, meaning in subsequent years when we celebrate what's happening to us this year, this miracle of the Exodus, on that day, tell your child all about it. So part of the observance of Pesach from the very beginning, it's mandated that we tell our children about the story of the first Pesach. Now, the Mishnah picks up on this commandment from Exodus 13:8, this commandment to tell your child about the miracle of Pesach. And the Mishnah is our earliest law code, codified around the year 200. There's a tractate Pesachim all about Pesach, and a whole chapter, chapter 10, devoted to the Pesach Seder. And part of that whole chapter is telling us how we actually fulfill this commandment to tell our children about the miracle of the Exodus. One of the things it notes there is that when you tell your child, you should meet your child where they're at, which is actually a pretty advanced pedagogical statement for the year 200. They say it in a slightly less advanced way. They said according to the intelligence of your child. That's how you tell them. But we can think of it a little more generally, that we each learn in a different way, we each are taught successfully in a different way, and the idea is different ways of teaching different children. So that's where this Midrash of the Four Children that we're so familiar with comes from, that idea in the Mishnah that different children should be taught in different ways. Now here's where the twist comes in, because there's actually more than one version of this Midrash. There's one in our Haggadah, and there are a couple of others out there. And the one that I want to tell you about is in the Jerusalem Talmud, the Yerushalmi, as opposed to the Babylonian Talmud that we use more often. And the difference comes up regarding the Chacham, the wise child, and the Tam, the simple child. In our Haggadah, the wise child wants to know about the laws of Pesach. And the parent is instructed to tell that child about the laws of Pesach, not too surprising. The simple child, on the other hand, the Tam, asks, Mazot, what is this? Has no idea what's going on. And the answer there is a quote from Exodus 13:14. You should say to that child, it was with a mighty hand that God brought us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. So there's one verse that encapsulates the whole grand dramatic narrative of the Exodus story. That's what you tell the simple child, the one-verse version of the great story of Pesach. In the Yerushalmi version, as opposed to our Haggadah, the wise child asks the very same question, tell me about the laws of Pesach, and the simple child asks the very same question, Mazot, what is this all about? And the answers are reversed. So when the wise child asks about the laws of Pesach, the response is the same verse, Exodus 13:14, it was with a mighty hand that God brought us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Not what that child asks. Don't tell them about the laws. They asked about the laws, tell them about the story. The simple child, Mazot, the response to that child is the laws. So there's a very different statement being made here about the role of law versus narrative. It's hard to know which version came first, which was a change from the other, or if they were simply two different versions floating around. It's not so important. What's important is the point that's being made. And I think in the Yerushalmi, there's an elevation of narrative over law being argued. The idea is that the wise child, the one who can handle more, that child should be asked to think about the story, to think about the significance of the miracle, to think not about how you do it, how we do it, but why we're here, what are we doing it all for. The simple child, so give them a few laws to grasp onto, and when they're older or when they're wiser, then we'll tell them what the deep meaning is. So my question for us this year is it the laws of Pesach that anchor us in the holiday, or is it the narrative? Which is more important to us? Is it the observance, the kashering the house, the rituals of the Seder? Is it all of that that makes the holiday really meaningful for us? Or is it the stories? Is it the story of the miracle that happened to our ancestors, the stories of our families that have accumulated around the Seder table? Is that really what anchors us and makes it most meaningful? Or is it some combination of both? And one final question to think about, when we ask questions, as the four children in the Haggadah do, are we asking the right questions? And maybe the answer to us should be something different from what we were expecting, something challenging us to think in a new way. Chag Sameach.